What's up, everybody? Welcome back to DodgerHeads, presented by DodgerBlue.com, part of the Medium Large Sports Network. My name is Jeff Spiegel, joined today by one of my favorite guests on the show, Lance Brozdowski, the guy who understands pitching at a level that I will never, and yet is able to explain it in a language that people like me can understand. So, Lance, you also help with the pre- and post-game show on the Cubs side of things. So here we are next Tuesday, 3 a.m. West Coast. I guess it's a little bit more manageable time for you, 5 a.m. In the middle of the country, but Major League Baseball regular season games are here.
I'm very excited. Yeah, it's cool. It's weird though that it starts and then we get more spring games and then it starts again. You guys dealt with this last year though, so you're
Yeah,
used to it. But for Cubs fans, it's very weird. And I imagine there'll be some adjustment for the team as well.
yeah, it's definitely a funky one, and the 3 a.m. thing throws me off. I mean, I'll be awake, but those
Yeah.
are going to be some very long days when
Oh
we,
man.
we we do our Tuesday night show. So I'll be on. I'll be up at 2:45 watching the game, and then back on at like 8:30 doing a post game show. So that'll be fun stuff. But the reason I wanted to have you on is to talk about three specific Dodgers pitchers, and primarily it's Roki Sasaki. We knew that this guy was different. You and I had conversations all spring, or excuse me, all winter about what it could look like, that kind of a thing. You, I thought, brought some pretty fair skepticism to like, how quickly is this thing going to happen for Roki Sasaki? As far as adjusting, there were questions about his velocity in Japan, all of that kind of a thing. I don't overreact to spring training stuff. Let me rephrase. I try my hardest not to overreact to spring training stuff. What has been, before we get into the nitty gritty on RPMs and the splitter and all that
Sure.
kind of stuff, what has been just big picture your takeaway on what you've seen from Sasaki and admittedly 2 spring training appearances?
I mean, I get why he was graded as high of a prospect as he was, especially given some of the WBC, excuse me, performances he had. I mean, the raw tools are there. There's just some limiting factors that Dodgers are going to have to get creative with in terms of actually getting him to be like a good major league starter. That's the
Yeah.
differentiation that I think is important.
Yeah, because right now, I mean, as good as he's been this spring, he basically has 2 pitches. It's a fastball that doesn't grade out all that well, and a splitter that grades out at a million. I'm sure there are like not even charts that grade the whiff rate that he's been generating on that pitch. He threw a slider in Japan a bunch. He doesn't appear to be throwing it unless the splitter is somehow like, I know there's been a lot of
Mm.
confusion about how they've classified the splitter because of sometimes it moves left and sometimes it moves right. And there's not a lot of pitches that do that. But is that kind of what you're thinking is A, will guys eventually lay off the splitter because it's below the zone? And B, like, does there need to be a third pitch, do you think, for this to really, really work?
Yeah, I think there probably needs to be almost like 5 pitches here for it to
Okay.
work. But we can talk splitter first. Yeah, it's a wacky pitch. The key thing to point out, and I'm the credit Alex Fast here of MLB, who does work with them. He also used to work for Pitcher List. He did some research where he looked at low spin splitters, right? Like
Yeah.
Sasaki splitter spins around like 500 RPM. That's a good tick below the average splitter. It's almost probably half the
Yeah, I
average
think a
spin of a
thousand to
regular splitter.
1,500 is what I saw as
Exactly.
kind of like average to above average splitters.
Yeah, so his is much lower than that. And when you enter low spin territory, you run into variance just because you don't have much air resistance or much resistance and spin to the ball. So it just starts to knuckle a little bit. Now, it's not a knuckle split. It's not like the ball is dancing on the way to the plate. But in the case of Sasaki, what happens is it creates lateral variance on the offering. So the depth's actually pretty consistent. He's just running into like a ton of pitches where it'll go arm side or glove side, etc. And among other low spin splitters, his like standard deviation, if you really want to get nerdy, in terms of like 70% of those splitters, like where do they move? Like what
Yeah.
is the range in arm side and glove side? His is like an inch or two wider than the average splitter
Mm.
around his RPM. So there's something else kind of going on with how he's throwing it or releasing it or his grip or playing with his release. Like there's a variety of factors here that a model or some of our modern stats are not going to be able to catch that makes this thing have more variance than other splitters. It's really good. It's also out of the zone a lot. This is what
Yeah.
you ran into with like Kodai Senga and a variety of these other guys. Like you don't really command splitters, you kind of just throw them. And if you want to push that thing into like 50, 60% usage, you start to turn them into like a reliever where you'd ideally want them to hang. You could split that by handedness. Like you could probably throw 50% of the time to lefties and get away with it. But if he actually wants to throw that 50% of the time to righties, like he's going to run into a lot of problems trying to turn over lineups. And then you get back to the fastball shape, which you just mentioned. It's not good. And I pointed this out from the MPB data as well, where it wasn't good in MPB data, and he was using a smaller baseball that moves more. And then he comes over here, and his first start, I thought it looked pretty good. Like I was
Yeah.
like, okay, this is kind of exactly what I pegged it to be. And then he had that other outing where it regressed more. So I don't know.
Okay.
I guess you could split the difference and put it somewhere in the middle, but it's not a great pitch. Like it's just He doesn't create vert on the ball. He doesn't have good spin capacity, so he's not really maximizing the raw amount of movement he can get out of his arm. And as a result of that, the Dodgers know. Like I've sourced it a bit. I know some people in the organization. They know he needs more pitches. It's just a matter of when you want to give them to him.
Yeah.
You saw this with Yamamoto. I mean, the Dodgers could say whatever they want in terms of like, oh, we're going to wait and see how he does, and like let him struggle first, etc. But with Yamamoto, they did the same thing. They gave him a month, and they gave him a sinker and slider, and then you started to see those branch out. He got injured, brought him up at the end of the year, etc. With Sasaki, I think there's an individual named Chris Langan who used to work for Driveline Baseball, had a really good thread on this. Pushing into some kind of sinker with him for his slot makes a lot of sense to help protect the fastball versus righties in particular, especially because when you watch Sasaki, a lot of his four-seamers are away, which is this Dodger philosophy of like pound that outer third, set up everything off that pitch outer third. You see this with Yamamoto, not so much with Glass now, but any of these more average four-seam shapes, they just want him down away. And I imagine it's a combination of wanting called strikes and also protecting that outer third line against some of their shorter sliders they throw. But if he could like keep the four seam over there and add some sinker inside, and if they could push him to a way on orientation to get the drop on that ball down such that he's picking up a little more downward action, that could create some ground balls, get him into quicker ABs. It could protect him using everything else. And then you could also play around with what Dodgers did with Gavin Stone and Michael Grove last year, which is like more like this weird vert cutter thing that they added to both those guys, where they almost went, stop throwing your four seam, just throw this thing.
Yeah.
It worked. I could see, now Sasaki's slot's a little different than those guys, but there probably is some kind of cutter in there that can work. So you see where I'm going. Like I'm playing like amateur pitch design here, where I'm like sinker to help against righties, some cutter to maybe bridge into lefties, so you can put that fastball away to lefties, and then the sweeper thing is fine. I imagine you could push the velo on it and turn it into more hard cutter. That would give him something like hard down in. It would look like his splitter, but the spin rate would be much higher. So, like, there's a lot of ways for him to evolve as a pitcher. It's just a matter of how quickly they want to present that to him and make him like a true starting pitcher. Right now, to me, he almost looks more like a reliever. It worked in MPB, but like this structure in MLB, turning over lineups, I don't think is going to work. The splitter is great, but I'm very curious to see when he turns lineups over, how the swing rate drops against that pitch over time. Yeah. Where righties are like, oh, it's just fastball split. I had no idea what I was doing first AB, but now that I saw you, like, I'm just never looking. I just want something up, man. Like, if you want to try to dot that fastball away, go for it. But, like, I'm not swinging the splitter below the zone because the zone rate on it's like 20% or something along those lines. So that's how I view him. Like, he's a project. And, again, going back to the main point here, he's so cheap. It does not matter that if he's a reliever. If he's a reliever for the next 3 years, or you want to start him as a starter, try it out for 2 years, then he flips to a reliever, it's still worth whatever money they're paying him. I just think because everyone had him as their number one pitching prospect, you expect him to be Paul Skeens, come up and be polished. He's not that pitcher. He is not that pitcher at all. So good pitcher, just like to get him to a 5-6 inning starter that you're confident in is going to take a bit of work.
And that's the last piece is kind of what I hear you saying, and I want to highlight for people that are probably losing their minds right now. And like, I can't believe this guy's saying Sasaki's a reliever. Like, keep in mind his age. Keep in mind the long-term view that the Dodgers have with him. Like, you're not saying he's a reliever and he'll always be a reliever.
No,
it's just a matter of like, in order to get to being like a Paul Skeens type, which is everybody wants to make that comparison, there need to be a third and fourth pitch, and not just like any third and fourth pitch, but he needs to get those pitches to be actually like good pitches, as well as maybe improving his fastball.
Yeah, exactly. And you think of the guys with like really reduced repertoires that have succeeded, all of them have really strong fastball shape. Like, I guess Hunter Green is maybe right on that border, but he also throws really hard. People have critiqued his fastball shape for a while, and I've always thought it was better than people thought. Like, his Green's fastball is better than Sasaki's fastball. So it's Green is like the floor, where it's like he's just fastball slider. He kind of mixed in some splitter last year, but even most of his repertoire is really reduced. Spencer Strider's another one. That's a great fastball, fastball slider combination. Then even you saw before he popped last year, he started trying to incorporate more. Let me go curveball, let me adjust my slider, etc. So it's just really hard to envision a guy with two pitches being a starter. And then you look at Sasaki and go, okay, if he's not sitting 98 for 5-6 innings, I don't think it's two pitches. I think it's one. And that's a way for him to protect the fastball. That's why I was like maybe almost a little more optimistic in that first outing where he was sitting 98. But it's just spring data is so tough where it's like you got a lot of juice flowing, adrenaline's popping, and he's sitting 98. And the next time out, he's like 96, 97. And it's like, oh, okay, that looked like what he was in MPB. And that works against MPB hitters, but it's not going to work against MLB hitters. So there's an evolution coming here. Like I guarantee you, we're gonna be talking again in a month and a half. Let's say like May 1st, there's gonna be a new pitch. That'll be the over under date on a new pitch for him. Or it's like, yeah, they're like Pryor's like, yeah, we're trying a sinker, or that's the main thing we found, that he can get away with a lot of fastball slider to lefties, which Yamamoto has done. But to righties, we really need something inside. Let's go sink. And now it's two fastballs and a split, and it works.
The splitter as it is there any chance that it is so good, that pitch itself is just so good that everything you're saying is true? Like, to be able to have alternative pitches and to be able to mix things up against lefties and righties, like, is there any world where this splitter is just good enough to where he can kind of be very good just as is?
I think that world exists. It comes down to things that we can't really measure in the numbers. The angle that I could see working there would be, there's something visually going on with that split that causes hitters to generate well above average swing rates on it, despite the fact that it's never in the zone. Such that even if you go up and have an advance report that says it is not in the zone, like one of every 5 of these is in the zone, such that 4 or 5 are not. Like, that is your expectation. So if you think it's split out of hand, or you have any inclination to shut down your swing, there could be something visually going on with the pitch that just hitters can't figure it out, just visually do not understand it. And that gets into like a very artsy land of pitching that I find fascinating. And I know the Dodgers are tapped into. They're one of the teams that loves setting up Edgertronic cameras behind home plate to let pitchers like view how they throw and how they visually look to hitters. This was something I talked to Bobby Miller about early last year when you guys were at Wrigley. And I thought it was a sharp point, because I feel like I only ever see Edgers behind the pitcher at release point, but like they were trying to convince him that like his slider needs to look different because to hitters they can pick it up. So I love that angle. So that's the angle here. Perhaps the Dodgers are betting on that. There's a visual component we can't really capture on the artsy side of pitching that allows the pitch to work. And other than that, I'm not entirely sure. The thing that I will say is like, this is a more like macro question, but like, do hitters see spin? I talked to a couple of pitchers about this, and the answer you'll hear a lot of the time is yes. Like, pitchers will say it and hitters can say it, or it depends on the pitcher, depends on the pitch. And then I go, okay, then why can no one hit splitters? Because that's the one pitch that's differentiated from almost all the other pitches in terms of spin rate. And yet, for the most part, everyone swings and misses at them. And it's like, okay, well, it looks like fastball out of hand. It's like, then you're implying you probably can't see spin, because that thing is spinning a fourth as fast as your fastball on average, right? Or let's say a half to a fourth, So that's another thing that's like always funny to me. It's like, I see spin out of hand. It's like, okay, are you really seeing spin, or are you seeing release variance, Where it's like, this is the whole idea that the league is pushed towards sliders, because curveballs pop above fastball lines. So you can ID them quicker for the most part as a hitter, from my understanding. So this is getting into a very fun land of like pitching theory, but I think it's applicable to Sasaki because the split is so good.
It's so interesting, and we'll move on. The whiff rate is the number that I think like fans like me who are getting into the analytics and the numbers, like whiff rate is one that we've wrapped our arms around and understand. And it's like, hey, good whiff rate equals good pitcher. But with Sasaki, it sounds like what I'm hearing you say is a number that is almost maybe a more important number is like the swing rate. Like, the whiff rate is going to be there, but if the whiff rate is high and the swing rate is low, then you're going to have a problem for a guy who's not throwing this in the zone. Because the splitter is almost never just going to be a called strike. Almost never. It's going to be a swing and a miss. And they might swing and miss a lot, but if, to your point, they figure out not to swing, it doesn't really matter how good the whiff rate is.
Exactly. I mean, and we're talking about Sasaki in the context of being like a starting pitcher, right? Like 6 innings, horse, 120 on the season. And like, when you get into that land, you could be a lot more critical. I do think for relievers, for the most part, if you look and see big whiff, you're like, cool, that's a good reliever. Put him in leverage, Like, and that applies. Fernando Cruz is a big split guy. There's Mark Leiter Jr. There's so many other splitter first relievers, almost to some extent, that work, that throw a lot of pitches out of the zone. It's just you see them for short spurts in a game, and you can't really figure out what's going on, and then you don't see them for a month, and it's like, okay, I have no idea. Like, I know he's throwing a splitter, but I can't figure it out. So I think, I don't want to say he's a reliever, but like, I think that there needs to be adjustment to get him to be a starting pitcher. And if we look 3-4 years down the road and he's an elite reliever, I don't think that's a problem. Like, it's a good player. It's probably better than having like a number 5 starting pitching prospect, or even a number 4 starting pitching prospect, especially if you look at the reliever market and what like Tanner Scott went for and stuff. Like the equivalent of his contract equaled some starting pitchers on the market, like a Luis Severino type. Severino's probably like a 3 or a 4. It's like, you want Tanner Scott or Severino at the same price. It's like, okay, if I take Sasaki an elite closer versus like a number 4 starter, like that draws even. So it's not a detriment for me to say eventually maybe he's just a reliever. I just think it's something you have to consider in the range of probabilities in his outcomes.
We're entitled, spoiled Dodger fans, Lance. We don't do number 4 starters. Okay, it's number
You
1
don't
starters,
know.
or we're not interested in you.
That's the dream. The dream for every org is to like, and I talked to some people on the player development side with the Dodgers. It's like, someone said one time to me, if we drafted like the Guardians, then we would have a glut of number 4 and 5 starters. And I was like, oh, you're taking a shot at the Guardians here. They draft like these velo development, high floor, lefty extension types. And it's like, we can make all those guys good. What we're trying to do is make like River Ryans, like that dude is unreal. Like, give me all my resources. I will play a lotto. 1 in every 15 guys becomes like a number 2. Like, that is far more valuable to the Dodgers as an organization than having like a bunch of number 4s and 5s that they don't really know what to do with, because they just pay for supplementary guys. That's the advantage of the org.
We had a great question on one of our live shows recently, and it was, of these 3 pitchers, which would you bet spends their entire career with the Dodgers? And it was Bobby Miller, Gavin Stone, and River Ryan. And both of us said River Ryan because we're like, Bobby Miller, who knows? But we're just like, I love Gavin Stone. I held my Gavin Stone stock after he struggled at first, and then it panned out last year. But I'm just like, River Ryan could be a dude. And they're just always like, I will just always bet that that's the guy the Dodgers take their chances on. No, Gavin Stone's like, could be like a number 2.5, 3 starting pitcher, but like River Ryan could be a dude. And so that's just the Dodgers MO.
Pepe was a great example too, right? Like, Pepe was a great pitcher, good pitching prospect. He had some trouble. They kind of fixed some things with him. He tried to go sweeper. They went away from that. But like, that's in that same vein. It's like, Pepio is good, but like Pepio wasn't River Ryan's level. And they were like, well, we're fine with going off Pepio to get a guy like Glass now. So it's like, it's their process, and I get it.
Yeah. Okay. Speaking of number 1 starting pitchers, this is a perfect transition. Is Yoshinobu Yamamoto a number 1 starting pitcher? And if so, why are we not maybe talking about him more? I talked about it on our live show. Basically, if you throw out the first start he had as a rookie last year, which was terrible, like 5 earned in 1 inning, across the remainder of his season, about 90 innings, he had a 2.5 ERA, a 2.5 FIP, a 10.5 strikeouts per 9. Those are all elite numbers. And yet maybe it's because Blake Snell, Tyler Glasnow, Sasaki, Ohtani are all on the same team. But I just don't feel like in like the Cy Young type conversations, Yamamoto's not a name that gets brought up.
Yeah. I always think it's important to like set a baseline. So Fangraphs has the thing they call like the 2080 scouting scale, which scouts talk about all the time. But in there, they have like a conversion back. So you can actually look at what a number 1 starter is. A number 1 starter true and through is like 5 to 6 WAR a season. Like, that is the baseline. So I feel like we often overuse that term a bit, where it's like, you think every team has a 1, not true. There's probably like 7 to 12 ones. Maybe that's even overdoing it slightly, So that's kind of the threshold, I would say, that you have to get Yamamoto to in order to say I am a 1. If he's more like 5 WAR a season, 4-5, then you're looking at like he's like a 1-2, 2-3. Like he's on the border. He's bridging between those options. So last year, from a WAR standpoint, he put up 2.8 in 90 innings. You want to double that and get to 180, then you can push right into that 5 territory and say it's like a 1-2. So that's kind of the baseline you're looking for. And it gets back to the main point here. He kind of just needs innings. Right? Like, he's a little undersized. I know there's been some research that undersized guys tend to run into some more injury risk, et cetera. I think the Dodgers are a good enough organization from a development standpoint to figure out how to not have that risk with him overall. He's projected for like 150-ish this year from an inning standpoint, which is pretty aggressive. I imagine that's going a bit off what he's done in MPB, where he had 5 consecutive seasons above 120 and 2-3 seasons above 160 innings. So like, this was kind of unorthodox to see him, I'd say, break down last year with the triceps injury, right? So he's projected in that 3.5-ish, let's say, WAR window, which in reality is more like a good 3, lower level 2. So like, you got a combination of things going on. I think he's a very good pitcher. I really like him. And I think what I was talking about with Sasaki, where they took a month and then added stuff, I think we'll get a full season where it's like, they were really just trying to figure out his righty approach, in my understanding. Like, his fastball is better than Sasaki's fastball. Still not an exceptional fastball, but it's good enough, in my opinion, to like survive. Throwing that a lot to lefties, he's like forcing split curve to lefties, right? But then the whole problem is figuring out the righty side of the equation. He's almost like a bit of a reverse splits guy. You saw this with Senga too. You see this with a lot of MPB arms that come over, where it's like subpar forcing shape, decent ability to create slider or break, and then a really good split. It's like, okay, I can crush lefties. We got to figure out righties. So they went sink, they went slider off that, which is kind of what we're getting into in the Sasaki territory. Same idea. We got to make those adjustments, I think. So Yamamoto, I'm excited. Like, I think he's going to have a great season. It just probably comes down to answering your question as to whether he's a 1 is the inning total. But on a per inning basis, which the Dodgers crush, you know what I mean? Like, think of Glass now. How many people want to dream him above 180 because he's going to win a Cy Young the second he does that? Maybe in the land of Paul Skeens now, it might be a little more difficult, but we'll see.
Yeah.
But I love Yamamoto. It's really just a matter of, like, number ones are so heavily tied to raw innings totals. So I would say, yeah, I think if you made me make a prediction on him, I think he gets Cy votes this year. I would imagine the prior history we have of him really pushing it in NPB in terms of innings totals, that he'll do the same. And maybe this is the year where you get like I think for each of the last couple of seasons, the Dodgers haven't had a starter go over 130, right? Or something crazy.
Yeah, I think Stone maybe got to 140 or 120 or 140. Gavin Stone threw more innings than any other Dodger starter last year, which tells you everything you need to know.
So you got a couple years in a row where you don't have these guys really pushing over in innings totals. And I get that because, like, you're almost guaranteed to make the playoffs. So you kind of need those guys peaking late. 100%. But maybe this is the year you get Yamamoto and Snell. I won't push Glasnow over. Let's say he runs into another injury, which I don't want to happen. I love Glasnow. But let's say Yamamoto and Snell both push over 160 regular season innings. Like, you're probably going to get some Cy votes on both those guys. And that's what I would be looking for in Yamamoto. So I know it's not the greatest answer here, but I do think they really solidified his righty approach. And I like him as a pitcher. I think he does everything well. It's really just a matter of, like, can we scale the innings up and really push that to be able to push into what you're saying about him being a true 1.
It's funny here you talk about the innings and Cy Young voting, because it's the Blake Snell story, right? Like, every single time Blake Snell has approached like 180, 200 innings, he wins the Cy Young. And then just thinking about the Dodgers, it's like, if I told you right now that Snell, Glasnow, Yamamoto, even like Ohtani, like all 4 of those guys were going to throw 170 innings in a season, you'd go and bet all of their Cy Young odds like the next day. Because it's like the biggest obstacle is not, are they going to be good on a per inning basis? It's, will they get enough innings? So it's just funny to think about that. I mean, we've known along that's the Dodgers strategy, right? And Rich Hill is in some ways the best and worst example ever of this, but he's the first guy I remember where they were like, we don't need you to throw 160 innings, Rich Hill, because for whatever reason, your ERA is like 2.5 whenever you're actually available. So throw 50 regular season innings and just throw some curveballs in the postseason, and we're good with it. And that's kind of, the Dodgers have just basically injected that strategy with steroids with the guys that they have now.
Yeah, and again, it goes back to the minor league side, being able to like pump out these arms that are good enough to hold and like be exceptional backfield guys that they eventually then trade for better arms. You know, because every team looks at what they have in the backfields and they're like, oh my god, like I would take this rotation that no one's talking about and double like that Tulsa rotation a year or two ago, like Frasso and Rod River and all those guys is like nuts. So it's the nature of the beast, man. You guys are good org.
Let me ask you one more Yamamoto question.
Sure.
He has the rookie season. He's very, very good. When you think about pitchers like Yamamoto, and you mentioned Imanaga as a guy in Chicago that you've watched, like a guy like this, do you think it's more fair to say, oh, he's going to be better his second season, he's more used to the ball, he's more used to America, he's more used to baseball, or to project a little bit of regression because, well, now there's a little bit of a book on him, guys have seen him, they've watched, they have more tape and more of a scouting report. Like, if you had to lean one way or the other, with not even Yamamoto specifically, but just pitchers in general, do you project improvement with familiarity or regression with familiarity?
Yeah, I'd probably project regression, but I did I just ran through like the top 30 pitchers in baseball on YouTube. I encourage you to check it out. It was just fun, like a minute on each guy, talk about what I see in them and stuff, really trying to go advanced. And the thing that I like very quickly realized in looking at guys is the guys who are metronomes, like Zach Wheeler, Logan Webb, where it's like every single year they're above 4 WAR and it's like 170 and everything looks good. You look at the on the surface, those guys are metronomes, but below the surface, constantly making changes. Like Zach Wheeler, each of the last 3 seasons added a pitch. Logan Webb completely turfed a lot of his changeup usage, which is the pitch that was really good for him. Started throwing like a sweeper. Like, there's constantly these guys do these things where it's like, if you're doing the same thing, that is where the regression comes. Such that in Yamamoto's case, it's not like we've seen, oh my God, he's got a new XYZ this spring. I just think this is the year, getting back to my point, that like the righty approach for him is unleashed, where it's not a lot of four-seam heavy, etc. It's a lot of four-seam sink slider, split curve. Like it's really diversified. He almost becomes like a random number generator to righties. Yeah. That's what I think will help him be this idea I'm talking about, where it's like you could become a metronome by making adjustments. For him this season, it's like refine the righty approach, really push usage on multiple pitches and get him to like, let's say like a low 3s ERA or something along those lines. He's projected for like a 3.3 or so, which I think was totally in the range of probabilities and it would be a great season for him. So that's how I look at it. It's like you're consistent, but because the reason you're consistent is that you're making adjustments. It's like this funny dichotomy I see a lot of the time in pitching.
Okay, before we let you go, I prepped you a little bit because I want to ask you about one guy that on 99% of these shows is probably not getting mentioned. He's like, will probably make the opening day roster only because of some injuries in the bullpen. But for a guy like you, I needed to ask you about Jack Dreyer. He's a lefty. He throws like a not that fast fastball, and yet it appears to be very good. This is a guy the Dodgers chose to protect in the Rule 5 draft. Admittedly, I think a lot of people were surprised he was the guy they protected. And then he comes into the spring, 6 innings, 10 strikeouts. I believe he has a whiff rate, by my calculations, that's like 56% so far this spring. And it's with a fastball that's like 94, 95, but he's basically like an Alex Vesia clone, and Alex Vesia has been very good. So when you look at Jack Dreyer, sort of the numbers, what jumps out to you?
Yeah, so like the big thing here is just he creates a lot of this backspin on his ball. So like the term you'll hear a lot of the time in the nerd space is vertical break, like induced vertical break. Average in baseball for an average release is like 15.8, 16 inches or so. When you push into like 18, 19, 20 inches, you start to get to guys that are like super high kick up slots, which is where you get a Vesia. Like if you look last year, like 100, even you could even put a minimum of 1 fastball thrown. Lefty fastballs, who had the most amount of this carry I'm talking about. It was Alex Vesia at like 20.3 inches or so. Dreyer in spring is averaging at just about that same amount at 93 miles per hour. So again, then you can filter it down more. Like sometimes the reason that ball is carrying that much is because it has more time to carry, which means it's slower. So like Tyler Anderson kind of pops on this list, the lefty you guys had for a bit. Like he's up at like 19-ish, but he's throwing 89. So like that ball's got a lot of time to carry. The big thing is like, can you push the velo and also maintain the carry? That's when you get into like some of the elite fastballs in baseball, or like your low slot and you ride it, like lower slot, like a Jacob deGrom's a great example, also throwing hard. But Dreyer to me literally looks like a Vesia clone. I think you nailed it. It's like the exact same structure, everything. I think the fact they got him up to 93 is really good. I know the Dodgers as a whole really like just raw vertical break. Like they weren't first last year in the league. I think it was the Red Sox were actually up there, and the Rays. The Rays also play in a dome, which kind of inflates that number. So let's say the Red Sox and the Rays were probably 2 of the top 4-ish. But the Dodgers were like top 10 in this number. But yeah, like they want good fastballs, you know what I mean? Especially in the relievers. They have a bit of a different approach from a starting pitching standpoint, but this is the exact kind of pitch that like is going to cause issues for right-handed hitters. He's got like this weird depthy kind of bullet spun slider often. He's got a big curveball too. Yeah, I mean, I don't know any other way to say it than he's like a copy paste of Alex Vesia. If it works, if it's not broken, don't fix it, right? So like Vesia leaves in a couple of years, like Dreyer's here. Perfect. Same guy.
Well, and that's the thing with Vesia. I remember looking like in 2023, he got sent down halfway through the year because he was struggling. He comes back up in, I believe it's July of 2023. And from that point forward, he has the 6th best ERA of any relief pitcher in Major League Baseball. It's like Tanner Scott is 1, Vesia is 5, Kirby Yates is 6. So like what's so bizarre is you watch Vesia, and it's the most baffling thing to the eye test because you're like, how does this work? This guy is throwing 93, 94, 95 mile an hour fastballs, and guys just swing and miss, swing and miss, swing and miss. And so with Dreyer, so I guess I'll ask this last question on Dreyer, and it's related to Vesia. Is like, it seems sustainable. Like, is it sustainable? I think I'm trained to believe that 94 at some point guys are going to figure it out. But we've now got a large sample size with at least Vesia that they just for some reason don't.
Yeah, so Baseball Reference has like an opponent quality adjustment, which I think is really important to look at with spring stats. It'll basically give you a number, and that number puts it within a range of like, hey, are the most guys you're seeing MLB hitters, AAA hitters, AA hitters? For Dreyer, his is like between AAA and AA. So like you're going to expect some regression there, But I mean, Vesia has been a pretty good pitcher for a good amount of the time, right? Yeah. His K rate's been crazy. He had a blip in 23, but like Velo was down last year, and he had one of his better seasons, which was an impressive feat the Dodgers are able to pull, So like, I think it's somewhat sustainable. I do think you kind of have to see how it plays at the major league level. Sometimes these lefties just have funk that, like, from a number standpoint, we kind of just can't quantify. This is always the problem when I do like prospect ranks and stuff. It's like I'm looking at everything and it's like, it kind of looks average. Then I realize he's a lefty, and I'm like, oh, okay, that's why he's got like a crazy swing miss on everything. Like there's something body wise going on. The hitter's mental map of pitchers they've seen in their lives is always going to be heavier on the right-handed side than the left-handed side. So if you're righty, like those angles that ability, that toolbox you have to go into to make adjustments on a guy because he's stepping crossfire like a Chris Sale or something along those lines is tough. And like that's where you run into like Vesia. Like I just don't see that much vert from a lefty much.
Yeah.
So like it's weird. And I think Dreyer's some kind of major league reliever, you know, which has value. And it just gets back to the Dodgers MO of like weird lefty types, perfect. We don't have to go out like and pay maybe for another Vesia or Tanner Scott. We could just bring up Dreyer and he'll plug into 6th, 7th roles, you know, slot in against particular kinds of lineups, be a good postseason weapon against hitters, righty hitters that really struggle against that vert shape because they have steeper swings. Yeah. So it goes back to what we talked about with their bullpen, right? They're trying to match up and create this weird game where they're able to plug in 3 different kinds of pitchers that really are able to attack your kind of swing such that they don't use the same guy in a playoff series all the time. They can play around with this decay idea that the more you see a pitch, the better you get against it in a series. They can go, cool, we got Vesia, we got Dreyer, we got all these other guys. We got Tanner Scott, who is another lefty who verts the ball, but he does it in a different way where he's like really far down the mound. So like that look between Dreyer and Scott is going to be different. And I think that could be an advantage to some extent against particular kinds of righty hitters.
Love it. I love it. Well, there's so much more I could ask you, but we're going to stop it there. That's Lance Brozdowski. You can find his stuff at Lance Broz, B-R-O-Z, on social media. And I believe that's the name of the YouTube channel, right?
Yeah. Search my name on YouTube. I'll pop up. Always fun to hop on.
Love it. And so you've got the top 30 pitchers as a video. You've got any other videos that you want to sort of promote here?
Yeah, I did actually want a bit ago on, I got some breakout pitcher stuff coming, which is pretty buzzy and everyone loves that stuff. It does well. But I did a video on your bullpen, Dodgers bullpen, alongside the Yankee bullpen, because you guys are both doing weird stuff in terms of how you're mixing up and combining. You guys went, I mean, we talked about this. Actually, it was inspired. Now that I'm remembering where the origin of this video came from, but it was inspired by you bringing up the fact that they like had a high barrel rate, I think, and didn't walk guys or something along those lines. And I basically dug into that, and they went after guys who have high walk rates but limit barrels. So it's this trend of like, is the next elite bullpen one that just doesn't allow barrels but does allow walks, which can be frustrating for someone watching when it's like there's always base runners on in the 8th and 9th. But then you look at the end of the year and you're like, wow, they stranded all of them because they went with the Snell approach and just struck out everybody. And then the Yankees are this team. I mean, we'll see. They don't look great right now with all the injuries. But if you guys run into them again in the postseason, they're throwing like their bullpen is all right changeups. Like they have Devin Williams, Luke Weaver, Mark Leiter Jr. They have all these guys that like do this thing that I think is maybe an edge for some orgs, which is like there's probably more room for right changeups in the league. And the Yankees seem to be really on that.
Love it. I love it. Well, that's Lance. Go ahead and check his stuff out. He's got a Substack as well. All of it's amazing, Lance. We appreciate you hopping on every time. Enjoy the season. Hopefully things go terribly for the Cubs next week. And then after that, you know, I hope things are okay for you. So
I'm looking forward to it. It'll be a great season, man. Thanks for having me.
We appreciate your time. Thanks everybody for watching. Again, please subscribe, ring the notification bell, and check out Lance's stuff as well. Enjoy the rest of your day, everyone. As always, go Dodgers.